Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. The fallout over comedian Jimmy Kimmel's comments about the killing of Charlie Kirk continues. US TV hosts support him as Trump threatens other TV networks that are negative about him. Now, Britain's intelligence service, MI6, have launched a new portal on the dark web in a bid to seek out new spies in Russia, China, Iran and North Korea. President Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping hold a productive and positive call, with Trump saying he appreciates the TikTok approval. Now to our top story. Some of America's famous late-night TV hosts have shown their support for comedian Jimmy Kimmel after his show was suspended by ABC. It was pulled over his comments he made about the assassination of the right-wing influencer Charlie Kirk, suggesting Trump's political movement, MAGA, wanted to exploit the situation. Stephen Colbert and Seth Meyers have spoken out against the decision, whilst Jimmy Fallon raised the issue of free speech in some of his own satirical sketches. Meanwhile, President Trump has suggested TV networks against him should maybe have their licenses taken away. For more on this, I'm joined by Autry Pruitt, former Trump campaign surrogate and president of Spencer Pruitt, and also a friend of Charlie Kirk. Autry, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me on board. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you too. So, was it right to suspend Jimmy Kimmel over his comments about Charlie Kirk's death made during an opening monologue to the show?
Yes, it was perfectly acceptable because nobody suspended him. Disney chose no longer to air his content. Nobody suspended him. The FCC didn't suspend him. Disney, a company, and the affiliates associated with that company, Next and Sinclair, chose no longer to air his content. Plus, his ratings were bad anyway.
Okay, so US talk show host Stephen Colbert has condemned the cancellation of Jimmy Kimmel as a blatant assault on the freedom of speech. Is America still the land of the free, where all views are respected?
Oh, of course, America, all views are respected, but just because your view is respected doesn't mean you have a right to the platform. You have the right to say what you want to say, but as Democrats have told us time and time again, we don't have to give you a platform to say it. In the United States, the public airwaves are the public airwaves. And for darn near 90 years now, you've had the public airways lean and go hard to the left. And now all of a sudden you have a Republican administration that is doing what the Democrats used to do, aligning the public airwaves with the voters. 50% or more individuals are conservative in the United States. So they're tired of hearing the garbage and the lies spewed from the left side of the aisle.
And, you know, I want to talk a little bit to you exactly about what you've just been talking to me about there. Looking back over the years, we have seen the cancellation of public figures who are on the right of politics, like Megyn Kelly, Piers Morgan, and, of course, Tucker Carlson. And if we think back, the likes of Jimmy Kimmel celebrated this. Do you think it's hypocrisy now coming from them?
Oh, I don't think it's hypocrisy per se. It's just outright blatant stupidity. It's a lie. It's an inconvenient truth, as Al Gore would say. They have convenient amnesia, some of my friends would say. The bottom line is that not only is it hypocritical, right, but they believe they hold a moral high ground. They're out of touch. What occurred here with Jimmy Kimmel and Charlie Kirk was very simple. Jimmy Kimmel has no idea the influence, the power, the strength, and the emotional attachment that Charlie Kirk had to half the country. He has no idea. And because of that, he was flippant about it. And Disney said, you know what? We're tired of having our stock beat up. We're tired of having people boycott us. We're tired of being the woke Fortune 500 company that everybody loves to come beat up on. We're not going to take it anymore. He even refused to apologize. So it was what's good for the goose is good for the gander. That's the United States colloquialism we used to say back in the day.
And US President Donald Trump has suggested some TV networks should have their licenses taken away. Autry, you're just talking to me there about Disney not wanting to be beaten up anymore over these comments over Charlie Kirk. So would you support the fact that some licenses should be taken away?
I 100% support licenses being taken away. I 100% support the Trump administration going after these left-wing lunatics in the United States. The FCC has existed somewhere for about 75 plus years, almost 80 years. And during the 80s, you saw a rampant abuse of power in the government. In fact, I don't have to go back to the 80s. I can go back to 2020 when the Democrats aligned themselves with Twitter and with the FBI and begin censorship around the country of anyone who spoke about COVID, of anyone who spoke the truth about any of the major incidents in the United States. So now, guess what? This is the first time a Republican president has done what the Democrats do. This is the first time a Republican president has stood up and said, you know what? We're going to use the levers of power to push back just like you've used them for 90 plus years. So I supported 100%. Maybe equal destruction, they call it, maybe self-assured destruction is the only way to get balance back in our great country here.
And also, I just want to talk to you a little bit about Charlie Kirk, because you were a friend of Charlie Kirk, and I watched many of his videos, as did a lot of the world. He touched so many people, and he really believed in free speech. He believed in debate. He was a deeply religious man. What would you like his legacy to be? And all this controversy now, what do you think Charlie Kirk would say to it?
Yeah, I knew Charlie Kirk early on in the latter years, post 25. I didn't really deal with him that much. I met him obviously at a couple of events. He had me at his events to speak. He was a person that believed in free speech. He was a person that believed in the Christian faith. It's not what I want his legacy to be. It's what his legacy is. His legacy is that if you allow the free debate of ideas, the cream will rise to the top. If you allow the free debate of ideas, the wheat will be separated from the chaff. In other words, simply put, a free debate means our side wins. And that's what the left is concerned about. A free debate means that social conservatives, economic conservatives win over time because our ideas are right and the progressive ideas are wrong. And Charlie was willing to say it publicly, and that's why he was shot dead while doing just that.
And are you growing increasingly concerned about the gap between the left and the right in the United States? Because lots of people are talking about it becoming so polarized there at the moment. Is there any way that maybe things could be dialed down a little bit, Autry?
I'm not really concerned about the gap. I love the polarization because before, when you had this closeness, right, the left and the right, you couldn't tell the difference between the two. And oftentimes you have people on the right pretend they're on the right and they dip into the left. People on the left pretend they're on the right and they dip into the right, right? You had this sort of back and forth. But now you see stark contrast. You see stark contrast between those on the left who want violence in cities, between those on the left who want rampant crime, those on the left who don't want you to be able to educate your kids, those on the left who want to deny that there is existence of a higher power, versus those on the right who believe in family, who believe in capitalism, who believe in fortune, who believe in faith, who believe in prayer. So I love the polarization because the more we get polarized, the more people come to our side, because now everybody can look at the left and say, guess what? You're crazy. You're a little bit crazy.
Autry, it was really great to have your insights and your views. Thank you so much for your time and for joining me on the show. Let's get into this further with comedian James Gardner. James, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. First of all, you're a stand-up comedian. What do you make of Jimmy Kimmel's firing? And did his material actually deserve him to get cancelled?
Well, thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Whether he was fired or whether he was stepped aside, ultimately censorship is censorship. He said something which someone hasn't liked, and then the next day, he's been taken off air. I think it's a really dangerous precedent to set. But in terms of what he was actually speaking about, I mean, I've got it in front of me. He's not actually used anything insensitive. He's not referenced the nature of Charlie Kirk's death. He's not referenced anything that would be detrimental to his family. He's literally highlighted in a humorous way. We have to remember that he's made an opening monologue. This is not an address to the United States Congress. Context is everything, as people so often said about Charlie Kirk's views. Whether you agreed with them or not, people stressed that context was important. He's making an opening monologue of a daily show where there is humour and politics mixed, and all he's done is highlight the hypocrisy, would it be, or the humour in President Trump saying, yeah, look at the construction over there, after someone asked him, how are you holding up, sir? So what he's actually said, I can't find anything wrong with it. And again, I just find it astounding that this has actually happened. And it sets a worrying precedent for free speech in the land of the free.
Another American chat show host, Jimmy Fallon, has spoken out about Kimmel. Just take a quick listen to what he had to say for me.
People are worried that we won't keep saying what we want to say or that we'll be censored. But I'm going to cover the president's trip to the UK just like I normally would. Here we go. Well, guys, President Trump just wrapped up his 3-day trip to the UK, and he
looked incredibly handsome.
As always, his tie was
exactly the right length.
And his face looked
like a color that exists in nature.
And his hair looked
better than Conrad's from the summer I turned 30.
What's your reaction to that, James? With all jokes aside, do you think comedians will need to dilute their content and be a bit more cautious to avoid losing their jobs? Is that something that is actually concerning people in the comedy realms?
I think so. I think particularly now that we're in a social media world, people that go, for example, to comedy clubs, most of them understand there's a tacit agreement that what you're seeing on stage is not real life. What you're seeing on stage is a performance. It's not an address to the House of Commons here in the UK. People are aware of that. But when something goes out into the social media world, you're putting that out to a whole audience of folk who perhaps don't understand the rules of comedy, who maybe don't understand satire, who don't understand tone or texture or sarcasm. And people want to take offence. There's many things that I don't like as a comedian. I don't like being spoken about. I don't like things that punch down at disabled people, for example. But I'm not the adjudicator of what's right and wrong. And it's one of those things. You must be able to go, OK, that's just life. I don't think that there's anything wrong with Jimmy Fallon's response. In fact, I think it's amazing. I think he's used sarcasm in a really beautiful way to address the elephant in the room. But touching on what Autry said there, very animated, great to hear his views. He loves the polarisation, but productive tension's important. The sparks between the left and the right, or one ideology and another, that's where new solutions occur. If we don't have that, if there's censorship or self-censorship, then all of a sudden we're just going to end up with vanilla and beige. And I think ultimately that by not being able to address key topics, important topics, they will articulate themselves in another form, and perhaps not in a controlled manner that comedy or an opening monologue allows.
And there's actually been speculation surrounding Kimmel's ratings. We heard Donald Trump talk about his ratings and saying that he wasn't a talented guy and his ratings weren't very good. Do you think that he'll survive this sacking or letting go or whatever we want to call it? And have we seen the last of him in this capacity now?
I don't think for a second. He's an incredibly talented guy. And I think there are incredibly talented people on either side of political divides or ideologies or faiths or religions. So I don't think it's fair for people to say he's not talented. If you don't like him, that's fine. I think there's a huge number of people who think he's fantastic. I think, his sacking, quote unquote, will galvanise his support. But in terms of ratings, it's happened here in the United Kingdom with a very successful radio presenter, Sangeeta Maiska, on LBC, critical of I think Israel's foreign minister. The next day she was removed from LBC, and they said it was to do with her ratings, and it turned out, after kicking it round the long grass, her ratings were excellent. So I think we're in a very dangerous environment for free speech. I think we should protect it at all costs. I think debating both sides is healthy, and I think humour is probably one of the most effective tools for holding power to account on both sides. That goes for the right, it goes for the left. I think it's really important that we preserve that, and it goes back to ancient times, back to 12th century. That's what court jesters were used for, to speak the truth to power. If we lose that, we're on a slippery slope.
Yes, of course, and humour is always a great thing to have in any society. James Gardner, it was a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for taking your time. Now, Britain's intelligence service, MI6, have launched a new portal on the dark web in a bid to seek out new spies. Potential agents from Russia, China, Iran and North Korea are being targeted in a bid to boost UK security. MI6 boss Sir Richard Moore made the announcement in Istanbul earlier today, saying the agencies were working behind the scenes to keep British people safe, especially from Putin's Russia. Take a quick listen.
I applaud the efforts of President Trump to resolve the conflict, President Zelensky for his willingness to make very difficult compromises, and European leaders working to achieve a just and lasting peace. However, I have seen absolutely no evidence that President Putin has any interest in a negotiated peace short of Ukrainian capitulation. He is stringing us along. To those men and women in Russia who have truths to share and the courage to share them, I invite you to contact MI6. You will be working to bring peace to our continent, to protect the long-term interests and redeem the honor of your country. You will be working with a world-class organization, and we will do everything in our power to keep you safe. Your needs and aspirations will be paramount. We can help you to make a difference.
Let's speak to Christopher Steele, a former MI6 officer who led the Russia desk at the UK Secret Intelligence Service. Christopher, an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. So,
Hi.
MI6 is launching its own dedicated portal on the dark web in the hope of attracting new spies online. Will this recruitment drive actually work?
Well, it's early days yet and difficult to say. I mean, the experience in the private sector, the private intelligence sector, which I now work in, is relatively positive in that the dark web has become a medium in which you can obtain information of relevance to investigations, for example. However, in general, the information that you glean on the dark web tends to be documentary in nature and quite low grade in a sense, more routine intelligence on people's movements and people's interests and things like that. And not the sort of high-level strategic intelligence on China and Russia that certainly the governments of Western countries are looking for. So it'll be intriguing to see, and we may not know, of course, in due course whether this works or not, but it's certainly worth a try.
In the recruitment video, it says for over 100 years, the bedrock of MI6 has been face-to-face. How safe is it going to be digitally, especially when it now comes to the sophistication of hackers, even when it comes to the dark web and encrypted websites?
Yes, there's an inherent problem with running people as sources remotely, indirectly, and so on. In that, as is said, the bedrock of intelligence relationships is trust based on personal contact and personal history, if you like. But the fact is that in this situation we're in, with particularly countries like Russia, it's extremely difficult for people to travel and so on outside of the country. We have to try and use whatever means we've got for obtaining information. The issue will be, of course, that there is a greater risk, I believe, of disinformation and of fake information, and actually of being set up by the other side. So we'll need to be very careful in triangulating, corroborating information that we get from news sources and to test them out. And I suspect that this will not be a sole means of running news sources. It may be a sort of routine method, and that will be supplemented by face-to-face meetings where those become possible.
In his final public speech as MI6 chief, Richard Moore warned that Putin doesn't want peace and accused China of supporting Russia's war efforts. How concerning do you think this warning is?
I don't think there's anything new in the warning. I think that those of us who have worked on the Ukraine war since it began and have been gathering intelligence on it would tell you that exactly what Richard was saying, that there's no sign that Putin has watered down his war aims. I, for example, don't believe there'll be a lasting and just peace in Ukraine for as long as Putin's in power. Politicians and state representatives have to watch their words in those areas, but that's my fundamental belief. And in terms of China, I think China is in this war for its own benefit. I don't think there's any particular love between Putin and Xi or Russia and China. In fact, quite the opposite. But it suits China particularly to have Russia out front as the pariah state rather than themselves, and for them to profit from things like low-cost energy imports that they're benefiting from Russia at the present time. And I think that it's imperative really on the West to put more pressure on China. And one of the ways that can be done, of course, is in these secondary sanctions that have been referred to, which Trump has applied to India for buying Russian oil, but has so far refrained from applying to China.
And if we just talk a little bit about the threat from Russia, we did hear some information today. NATO intercepted the Russian aircraft that violated Estonian airspace today. And we are seeing these violations more and more. And many people are asking the question, is Russia now trying to provoke NATO countries to test their red lines?
Yeah, I'm sure they are, although I'm also convinced that Russia's armed forces have been so degraded during the course of this war that they don't have the capability to launch a secondary attack on any NATO state, not at the moment. Their objective will be to try and get some kind of win out of Ukraine, or at least a win that they can present to their people, to get some kind of sanctions lift and to rebuild their forces over the next few years, so that in 4 or 5 years they could come back and threaten, say, Estonia or Lithuania. But they certainly will be testing our resolve and our unity. And my fear is that President Trump is not a fully committed ally of Ukraine or of Western democracy. And that's what the Russians sense. And they sense a weakness and a disunity that surrounds Trump and his administration, who are very different from their predecessors, and in reality have a very different approach to this than our own government does, say, in the UK.
And it's really interesting because if we think of Russia's President Vladimir Putin, he was former KGB, and it's been really well documented that he is a great manipulator. And do you think that this is something that's been happening behind the scenes when it comes to negotiations and trying to stop the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, I think Putin's great strength in many ways has been to allow Russia to punch above its weight, quite literally. Russia's never had the capability to control and dominate Ukraine or to take on the West, really, either economically or militarily. But he seems to have got the upper hand in personal interactions with people like Angela Merkel, arguably George W. Bush, and now Trump. And that's a very worrying trend. And I think it needs to be called out. And the truth of Russia and Russia's relatively lack of strength and lack of success in this war, after all, has to be put on the table as a way of pressurizing Putin into drawing back. Although, as I say, I personally don't believe that we'll see a proper peace settlement under Putin.
And just one really quick question before I let you go. We're talking about a recruitment drive into MI6. If somebody's interested, what credentials do they need, Christopher?
I don't want to go too much into that, but essentially what you need is to have access to information that can't be obtained by other means. And the higher quality of that information, the better. But I think also there are a whole load of personal attributes, bravery, discretion, self-discipline, and everything else that comes into play in a good source. And it's a relationship that develops at a very deep level of trust. And trust takes a long time to build up and is lost very rapidly. And so that's the basis, I think, of human intelligence work.
Christopher Steele, it was a pleasure to chat to you. Thank you so much for your analysis and insights. Now, President Trump and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, have held a phone conversation. President Trump said it was a productive call and that he appreciates the TikTok approval. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping confirmed the talks were positive and said that the country's position on the social media platform is indeed clear. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by economist Laurie Laird. Laurie, welcome to you. How are you? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Leigh-Ann.
Happy Friday to you too. Same thought there. Let's get in a little bit to what's been going on today. So President Xi Jinping says China's position on TikTok is clear. However, President Trump thanked China for TikTok approval. Oh, reading between the lines, are we any closer to a deal at all? Everything just seems so uncertain.
I feared you would ask me about this, Leigh-Ann, and I'm going to try and come up with some sort of insight. This really caught me by surprise because we had the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, meeting in Spain with a number of other luminaries earlier this week. He said on Tuesday that a deal was done. He didn't want to preempt an announcement. He wanted Donald Trump to announce it. What we got here is a mishmash. I have absolutely no idea what is going on here. I think that what we can assume, reading between the lines, is the fate of TikTok has become intertwined with a whole lot of other economic issues. One is China's attitude toward a couple of tech companies. China recently, earlier this week, dropped an antitrust investigation into Google, but announced one into NVIDIA. Weirdly, it announced an antitrust investigation into NVIDIA that it had already improved. This feels like leverage to me. And of course, we still have lots of uncovered things in trade talks. So I think the fate of TikTok has been lumped in with all of these other unresolved issues. The immediacy of resolving TikTok, though, has gone away. Earlier this week, the government extended yet again a congressional mandate that said that there had to be a resolution by Wednesday. The two sides now have until December to sort this out. And remember, a year ago, or it was actually less than a year ago, but in January, it was meant to be TikTok was under U.S. ownership or it went dark. Right? That has been extended 4 times, and now there are still a couple more months to play with. So you and I will be discussing this at a later date, I am sure.
Yes, I know what you mean. It does seem quite confusing, and a lot of people are asking big questions like, who's going to own TikTok in the US? We don't know any of this, lots of speculation. But we should also remember one thing in America, 170 million people use TikTok. That's absolutely huge. And we know President Donald Trump, even though he did sign the executive order to get rid of it in his first term, has come back and said, actually, TikTok helped me get re-elected into the White House. How important is this deal for US consumers and the people who have their lives and businesses on TikTok?
I think that we can, you've hit it on the head. I think that we can assume now that right of center politicians have realized that TikTok and other social media platforms are not their enemy. I think there was a feeling in Donald Trump's first term that social media was run by tech bros in California who are all Democratic supporting. And that was part of the reason I think that Donald Trump in his first term was so adamant that TikTok had to go. But now we're seeing that the right of center has learned to use these platforms extremely effectively. As you say, 170 million people are looking at TikTok. They're not all looking at political content. And in fact, I think I'm one of the few people I know that's never been on TikTok. Maybe when we're done, I'll take a look at that. But I think that now that politicians of all stripes have learned how to use this effectively, they're not that keen on letting it go. One of the most successful politicians this year here in the UK is a guy called Nigel Farage, who is leading the Reform Party, which is quite right of center. He is by far the most skilled social media performer and has used TikTok to such strength. One thing that's interesting is the Financial Times, which is a credible source, as you know, reported earlier this week that part of the agreement that we thought was coming allowed China to hold on to control of the TikTok algorithm. That is very interesting because this is what the U.S. said they did not want. Initially, it was because they thought it was a security risk, but now the feeling is that perhaps, the Chinese algorithm can be pro-China propaganda down those pipes.
And also, Laurie, I'm afraid we're out of time, but they also say the algorithm with TikTok is very addictive and much better than the others. So let's see what happens next. Laurie Laird, thank you so much.
On it, right?
Thank you so much for joining us. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have signed a joint strategic defense agreement in Riyadh. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman met with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, reaffirming the long-standing relationship between the two nations. The signed agreement states that any aggression against either country shall be considered an aggression against both. Earlier, Al Arabiya English presenter Tom Burgess-Watson spoke to Pakistani government spokesman Musaddiq Malik. Take a listen.
In an exclusive interview here on Al Arabiya English, we'll be getting the latest on a defense pact signed between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Any attack on either nation will be considered an attack on both. Well, this strategic mutual defence agreement was signed during a visit to the kingdom by the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who held talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Well, I'll be speaking to Musaddiq Malik, who is a Pakistani government spokesperson, for all the details on that deal. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have signed a defence pact pledging that any attack on either nation will be considered an attack on both. Well, this strategic mutual defence agreement was signed during a visit to the kingdom by the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who held talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at the Al Yamama Palace. Well, in a statement, the visiting Pakistani Prime Minister thanked the Crown Prince for his, quote, keen interest in expanding Saudi investments, trade and business ties. Well, accompanying the Pakistani Prime Minister on that visit to Riyadh was Musaddiq Malik, who is a Pakistani government spokesperson who joins us now. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us.
My pleasure.
Now, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have a strong and historic relationship. Military ties between the two countries go back decades. Why is this deal so significant in your opinion?
I think it's the relationship that you're referring to, which goes back since the creation of Pakistan. And frankly, if you look at the roots of this relationship, they go back 1,400, 1,500 years. So the brotherhood that had historically, I think, has manifested itself in various forms. At every juncture when Pakistan has needed support, the kingdom has been by the Pakistani side. Whether it was economic development or defense-related matters or diplomacy, the kingdom was already there and always there. And same goes for Pakistan. If you walk down the streets of Pakistan, you would find out that even a common man would say that we are going to be there by the side of our Saudi brethren if the two holy mosques are ever attacked. And it needed no treaty. Every Pakistani would tell you the same. So I think what was implicit before and unstated has taken the form of a treaty. And that's the most significant part of this treaty, that it's now kind of a relationship which is documented, but this relationship has been there forever.
Okay, so let's talk about what's been agreed on. An attack on one nation means an attack on both. And I want to ask you, what message does that send out to the world?
I think it sends out the message of brotherhood, and it sends out the same message that the North Atlantic Treaty gave to the world, that this is not offensive, this is not aggressive, this is not against anyone. This is a defensive treaty where countries who have cultural ties, who have religious ties, who have all kinds of relationships, economic relationships, other relationships, they come together and they're going to exchange technology, they're going to exchange training, they're going to share innovations, and they're going to have joint military exercises to make sure that the experiences that we've had over the past several decades being extremely better, battle hard, and has, we share them and become a formidable force.
Okay, just talk us through some of the details of the deal. What concretely does it provide for?
I mean, it's kind of like many other defensive. I think the best way of looking at it is to look at NATO. It's not an aggressive treaty. It doesn't fight for attacking anyone. But if any of the countries in NATO framework are attacked, it would be deemed as if all of them have been attacked. So we've had this relationship or tacit understanding for several decades, or frankly forever. It's just that we've now articulated it in the form of a treaty.
Okay, and do you think this deal is going to make the region safer? And as an extension of that question, do you think the deal could be extended to other countries in the Gulf?
I think very good relationships, very deep relationships with other countries. But the kind of relationship that we have with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is unprecedented. So I'm not terribly sure how our relationship with other countries would pan out. But if there was a larger work, and I'm not committing to anything, but I would like to believe that if there was a larger framework which created more stability and more peace, Pakistan is always open to discuss that lead to peace and stability. So we would take into account anything that comes our way, but only in the way of something that creates peace and stability in the region and doesn't create any, we don't want to be part of anything that destabilizes the region.
Okay, and of course you've just come back from Riyadh, and I saw all the flags there welcoming the Pakistani delegation to the Saudi capital in the last few days. As well as strengthening defence cooperation with the kingdom, just tell us what else was agreed during that state visit.
I think this round was exclusively about our defence agreement. And we spoke about a lot of different elements of that, including, as I mentioned to you earlier, exercises, technologies, and sharing, intelligence sharing, technology sharing, and so on and so forth. So this visit was primarily focused on that.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Musaddiq Malik, Pakistani government spokesperson, thank you very much for your time, sir. Well, you can see that exclusive interview in full on our Saudi business show, The Real Deal, which airs as ever on Monday.
A reminder of our top stories. The fallout over comedian Jimmy Kimmel's comments about the killing of Charlie Kirk continues. US TV hosts support him as Trump threatens other TV networks that are negative about him. Britain's intelligence service MI6 have launched a new portal on the dark web in a bid to seek out new spies in Russia, China, Iran and North Korea. President Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping hold a productive and positive call, with Trump saying he appreciates the TikTok approval. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for watching.